Hello, today the claim that I'm refuting is talking about converting Election Day into a national holiday and how it will increase the voter turnout. However, my claim is that converting Election Day into a national holiday will have little to no effect on voter turnout. The speaker's main claims are that voter turnout in the U.S. is low. Scheduling is the main reason for low voter turnout, and how other countries address scheduling and how their voter turnout is. So, for one, the speaker mentioned that on average the U.S. has 60% of eligible voters participating in presidential elections and 40% of voters for midterm elections, and that we rank 26th out of 32 nations voting turnout-wise and 139 out of 172 countries. Overall, the point was that we shouldn't settle for a democracy where there's 80% of youth and young adults and low-income citizens who don't vote. So for one, the data presented regarding the U.S. ranking for voter turnout rates is not very sufficient when you take into account that some of those countries on the list exercise compulsory voting, where voting is made mandatory, or there will be consequences of fines and legal sanctions. Also, the statement that out of 172 countries, we rank 36th. The U.S. is compared with. Many of those countries have low populations and a lot less diversity, which means that those people think more similarly to one another than do people in the U.S. For example, one of the countries on the list of 172 countries was Estonia, and the population is 1 million compared to the U.S.'s 330 million. And lastly, regarding this point, the data presented about the U.S. having 80% of youth and low-income adults not voting doesn't make sense when compared to the people who are eligible to vote, because that would only be 53% if we're averaging the people voting in midterm and presidential elections, which is 47% according to NPR.org. So this statistical evidence would better correspond to a claim talking about making voter eligibility requirements easier and the voting age lower. But other than that, it is unclear what the data was referring to. Their second claim was that scheduling is the main reason for low voter turnout. According to the speaker, conflicting schedules is the most common reason for not voting, and that the date to vote was convenient back in 1945, but currently as of 2019, it is not. And the last point was that long voting lines also contribute to people's decisions not to vote. For one, there are multiple ways to vote. A polling station is just one of the many ways to cast your vote in November on a Tuesday. Citizens can also vote by mail, which is also very convenient if a person happens to be too busy to sit and wait at polling stations. Even some counties offer early voting at a couple locations before Election Day. So if the Tuesday in November conflicts with their schedule, they have options to vote earlier than that. And this evidence was provided by California's Secretary of State website. And then secondly, not all businesses are closed on holidays. Many businesses are still open on Christmas, one of the most celebrated holidays in the U.S. So we know that there will be businesses open on election day if it was a national holiday. So this statement was made to assume that majority of businesses are closed, meaning that employees will have more free time to vote, although that's not how it will work. The third point regarding scheduling is that the actual number one reason why people don't vote is because registration takes work, and people typically don't favor doing extra work. Another reason, according to Washington Post, is educational status, disagreement with the two political parties, and voter apathy. Some people simply don't agree with our government and choose to opt out, while others simply could care less about politics and remain oblivious to the whole topic. These are the other main reasons why people really aren't voting. And lastly, the midterm voter turnout in November 2018 hit a 50-year all-time high. This shows that comparing to the past, more and more people are voting. We aren't stagnant in our voting rates, and throughout the years, we aren't rolling backwards either. This shows that despite having Election Day be in November on a Tuesday, the same day every year, voter turnout is still increasing, and scheduling has little effect on people voting or not. And the last point that the that the speaker made was how other countries address scheduling and their voter turnout. So it mentioned that Sweden has a turnout of 96%, Belgium has the highest voter turnout, and that Korea has a voter turnout of 77.9%, and they also happen to have their election day be on a holiday. For one, Sweden has 8 different political parties, so they have much more political representation than the U.S. does. When people feel that they have when they have representation in their beliefs and ideals in politics, they're more likely to participate and vote in government elections. As with the U.S., we only have 2 parties, so more people, and there are more beliefs than Republican and Democratic. Secondly, Belgium has the highest voter turnout because they are one of the countries that utilize compulsory voting, and they're first the country to do so, which means that it's required to vote, which goes against the U.S.'s ideas because that would violate the First Amendment and our right to choose when to use our voice for speech. And then lastly, these countries have many other factors that differ from the U.S. when it comes to voting, and these factors weren't addressed in the original argument. For example, the couple countries that have multiple different political parties. In conclusion, I hope that you will all see and come to a collective agreement that having voting day be a national holiday is not what would increase voter turnout and has little effect on voter turnout currently.
All right, organizational stuff is really solid. I like information that you have on the first point when you talk about some of the reasons that the comparisons are not legitimate, like the compulsory voting, which you do get back to later on, and the size of the countries that we're dealing with. I think you have a good illustration there. I was completely confused about your statistics about how youth voting is affected by this. I'm not sure what the point was that you were making. There's an argument about eligibility. If eligibility is an issue, then you can present that as a counter cause to a lack of voting, and you should make that claim a little bit more specific. The second point on scheduling, I think, is where you have the best analysis here. You suggest that there are alternative ways to vote. You've got some evidence that shows that in California people can vote by mail. There's early voting, so they can time shift their voting, so they don't have to be voting on election day, and they're not going to run into that kind of scheduling. If that's true in other parts of the country, then that would seem to minimize this point completely. And then I think that the analogy that you draw to holidays and the advocate's assumption is that people will have the day off. Well, people don't always get the day off on holidays, and you've got good illustrations. You know, stores are open on Christmas, movie theaters are open on Christmas, hospitals are open on Christmas. Lots of businesses are open on holidays. In fact, some of them, I know you're there somewhere. They are. Some of them, they not only are open on holidays, they're trying to get business on holidays. That's why they advertise so vociferously, Memorial Day sale, Lincoln's birthday sale, that kind of stuff. Well, yeah, holidays, that keeps people at home not working. That's not the case at all. And I think you've got, you could sell that point a little bit more. The notion that people have resistance to voting for other reasons, I thought that was pretty good, that they have voter apathy, or they are not well educated on the subject, or they simply don't care. They're kind of opting out of the system. I think that that's okay. And you did show, for instance, that the trends go up and down. I thought that the information that you had on 2018 was okay. The argument that compulsory voting in other places, or things that incentivize other voting in other places, are particularly problematic to our system, I think that's an interesting contradiction. The right to free speech also includes the right not to speak, and compulsory voting is definitely, the antithesis of that, forcing people to choose an option, and that's not something that seems very reasonable. I think your argument is really solid. It would be so much better if you weren't reading everything. And, I think you'd come across more effectively if you just made your arguments to us and told us what your point was. And it sounds very mechanical when you're reading it, and I think that undermines your credibility a bit. All right, thank you.